and just a little bit of a commute. And what I love most about my job is really the variety of what I see and do. I have patients who I have long term relationships with. I have patients of all ages. I get to do procedures because I'm a dermatologist, and I get to diagnose medical problems too. So really, it's the variety that I get to see that comes through my practice. And I'll pose the same question to you, Dr. Lee. Where do you practice now, and what do you love about your job currently?
Like you, I'm a dermatologist and I am currently in private practice outside of the Philly area. I do have an academic affiliation with Temple, which means that we have residents rotating through our clinic. And I think what I love the most is, like you said, just those long-term relationships. And it's so exciting when I get to see my same patients again and I get to see how the first semester of college went for them. And I might just be seeing them for like a wart or something, but just to see how much they've grown from, their last year in COVID high school to COVID freshman year in Virginia or Michigan or Florida or Philadelphia, and just to see them back and see how much they've grown and the path that they've taken, the path that they've chosen in school. That's really, really meaningful for me. I also really, really love the variety of what I do. So, like you were saying, I love seeing patients just in a clinical setting. I love doing surgical procedures. I love doing cosmetic procedures. I love seeing kids, adults. It just the variety just never gets old. I can't imagine doing anything else. I can't imagine being a paralegal or something where every day I'm doing the same tasks, or similar tasks over and over again, albeit for different cases, where I may not have as much variety in what I do. And I just love that I never know what will walk through my door. So every day is a surprise, for good and for bad. But I really like that, every day is different and I'll never get bored with what I do. So I think that's probably the favorite part of my job, with being not just a dermatologist, but most importantly, a doctor.
I agree completely. The challenge and the excitement of every day being different is so wonderful and so unique to our profession.
Yeah, definitely. So I think with that, what we'll do is we'll get started. So thank you everyone for being on our webinar tonight. We're really excited that you could spend Tuesday night with us, especially in the middle of a snowstorm in the Northeast where I reside. So my name is Dr. Kichu Lee, and I'm the Director of BSMD Admissions with Med School Coach. I did my undergraduate and my medical school career at Northwestern through the HPME program, which is the 7-year guaranteed admissions program. And while I was there, I served on the admissions committee, and got some insider's background on what it's like to be on a direct admissions BSMD committee. Afterwards, I did my dermatology residency at Brown. After residency, the journey continues. I did more training, and I did a fellowship at Mass General Hospital at Harvard University. After I completed my fellowship, I worked as an assistant professor at Brown, and I'm currently in private practice, although I'm still academically affiliated with Temple. I'm really excited to be here with you guys tonight, and I'll be talking about the BS and MD admissions process part. I'd also like to introduce you to Dr. Larja Vardy, who will be talking about the traditional admissions process.
So I'm Dr. Nusha Lajavardi, and I am a master advisor at Med School Coach. And I am typically advising applicants and clients who are applying via the traditional route or non-traditional applicants. I too completed my undergraduate education at Northwestern University. I actually did a master's in between my undergraduate and medical school careers. So I completed a Master of Arts in Medical Sciences at Boston University, then went on to attend medical school at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine, and then went on for my residency training. So this was done in dermatology as well at Brown University, just like Dr. Lee. And my prior work position was an assistant professor at Brown University at the Department of Dermatology. I loved staying on for faculty there. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, so made my way back to South Florida, and my current position is in private practice in Fort Lauderdale. I'm also very, very excited to be joining Dr. Lee. So thank you for having me to co-host this webinar. And I will be speaking about the traditional route to medical school.
Thank you. So typically for medical school, your schooling itself can take anywhere between 10 to 12 years. You have college for 4 years. Some people do a postbac or a master's, which is another 1 to 2 years. In addition, some people might even take a gap year, which is another 1 to 2 years. And then they have medical school, which is 4 years. After you graduate with medical school with that MD, you're not quite ready to practice yet because you still have residency or fellowship training. That usually adds on another 4 to 10 years. So you have internship, residency, fellowship, and then you become an attending physician. When you look at the alternative on the next slide, um, if you do a direct BSMD program, you can really cut off some of that time early on. And the reason is because you have direct admissions to medical school. Instead of a 10-year pathway, you actually have only a 6 to 8-year pathway. You do college for 4 years and you do medical school for 4 years. And some BSMD programs actually condense that to college in 2 years or college in 3 years and then medical school for 4 years. So you can see that all in all, the difference in terms of how many years you're spending in terms of the schooling part of the process is much shorter if you go with the BSMD direct route. This does not cut anything off of the training route in terms of doing your internship, residency, and fellowship. And so this really just cuts off time off the early years of college. So typically BSMD programs look holistically at your application, and they don't look at just one component, but they will look at a variety of components in your application. They'll look at grades, community service, research, clinical experience, as well as leadership and awards. And on the next slide, we'll start talking about each of these factors a little bit more. In terms of grades, what BSMD programs typically look for are students that are in the top 10% of their class, if your class gives you a class rank. They look for students who are in the top tier of their SAT and ACT scores, as well as an unweighted GPA of at least a 3.5 or greater than 90%. They look at your transcript or your courses that you took in high school, and they want to see that you took a heavy STEM-based course load and that you could handle those courses. Of course, it's also important to be well-rounded, so it's important that you take English, history, humanities, or even foreign languages. Next, we'll talk about community service. With community service, I always emphasize that it's important for students to have a continual longitudinal commitment. So it's much more impressive if you participated in the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts for 4 years and you committed, 4 hours a week to that, versus if you just volunteered at a food bank for one summer and you did 80 hours all at once. If you're passionate about something, you really need to show that you've done it over the long term, because that means a lot more to admissions committees. They also look for leadership roles. So if it's something that you're passionate about and that you've put a lot of time into, you will naturally gain a leadership role, whether that's as the president of your organization or whether that's in a regional or a national leadership role if it's a national organization. Next, we'll talk about research on the next slide. With research, BSMD programs really look for applicants to differentiate themselves by the number of publications or presentations that you have. When they're looking at the research that you've done, they ask whether this is your project that you've done or whether it's someone else's project. Obviously, if it's your project, it carries a lot more weight. Furthermore, if your project is one that's taken you to national science competitions or ones where you've gotten a lot of awards, then it's one that they'll look at more highly because it's a project that really produced tangible results. Next, we'll talk about clinical experience and physician shadowing. I tend to say that this is the most important part about your BSMD application. It's hard to convince someone that you want to be a doctor if you've never actually seen what a doctor does. When you're looking for clinical experiences or physician shadowing, you want to have as direct as possible patient care. So for example, working at a hospice or at a nursing home, you want to shadow physicians of different specialties, and you want a diversity of clinical environments, such as inpatient, outpatient, working in the ER, working in rehab. This will give you a really diverse view of what medicine is and will help you convince the admissions committees that you've really explored medicine as a career. And finally, we'll talk about leadership and awards. With leadership and awards, it's important to have many leadership roles because, again, a physician is the leader of their healthcare team, and it's important to show that you have the skills to start early. Admissions committees look at whether your leadership role is one on the local, the regional, or the national level. It's better to have one national role than it is to have 20 local roles of minimal significance. And with awards, it's also very significant to have national awards, whether they're in science, math, history, or art. Remember, they don't always have to be in STEM. It's important to be a well-rounded student. So if you get a national history award, that's regarded pretty much the same in terms of prominence as a national math or science award. And finally, I'll have Dr. Lardivardi talk about the traditional route to medical school.
Okay, so with the traditional route, really we begin with what we call weed out. So you would enter college as a pre-medical student, which means that you want to complete your pre-medical requisites, which we'll go over. After that step, there's a number of people who weed out from those courses. You go on to finish the prereqs, you get to the MCAT. So this is the entrance exam that is required to apply to medical school. And typically students who are applying directly from college to medical school are taking the MCAT their junior year. And then after that is done, you get to the actual application of applying to medical school, and finally getting into medical school. So what are these required prerequisite pre-medical courses? Each school has different requirements. So each medical school has different requirements, but generally there are ones that are accepted among all medical schools and are expected for you to take. So this includes biology, so general biology with lab, general chemistry with lab, basically physics with lab, organic chemistry with lab. Math would be something like calculus, even a statistics course. It is often recommended, not necessarily required prerequisite, but recommended to take biochemistry. It is definitely expected to take an English course, and psychology and sociology would be part of humanities courses that are preferred as well. So next slide. Then finally, there's the MCAT, which is, like I said before, the entrance exam to medical school. So for the MCAT, you absolutely need to plan ahead. It takes about a few months to study. So there's actual course review that you need to do, as well as practice tests. You can use prep courses to help in your preparations. We do recommend taking the test date earlier, so that allows for your score to be received and prepared for your application. And you do want to have your first score by June or July of your application year. And if you are planning to retake the MCAT, then the second score at the very least should come in by August or September. Okay. So along with the prerequisite courses and your college academic career, as well as the MCAT, we have extracurricular activities. So these basically fall into the same categories that Dr. Lee mentioned, which include community service, clinical work, research, and shadowing. And you want to have a variety of extracurricular activities that fall into each of these categories. So what makes the best extracurricular activities? Dr. Lee did touch on this. I'll just quickly review it, but a continual longitudinal commitment. So doing or engaging in some activities over time is much more impressive than doing many different activities for short bursts of time. You should find something you're passionate about because you'll care for it and it'll excite you. And that'll come through in your application as you write about your activities. Direct as possible patient care, just because we want to make sure, admissions committees want to make sure that you understand what becoming a doctor entails. Leadership experiences, so this can be within community service organizations, within school organizations. Research that produces something such as a presentation, an abstract, or a paper is preferable. And of course, you can get letters of recommendation from your research or other extracurricular activities. So at this point, one may feel like they made it and are now finally ready to apply to medical school. But this isn't the case because the statistics are quite competitive in that only about 40% of applicants who are applying to medical school actually get in. So how to ensure the success of your application? Number one, of course, is to prepare and plan. And this includes excelling in your academic career. So you want to maintain as high as possible a GPA, as well as a highest possible MCAT score. Then together with your extracurriculars, you will make a well-rounded application. And then after you have applied, there's the interview process. So medical schools will ask you or invite you for interviewing. And then after that, the decision is actually made for acceptance. So here's the timeline. This is the typical timeline of someone who's applying to medical school straight from college. So basically in your junior year, January through April, you'll be studying for the MCAT as well as requesting letters of recommendation. In May or June of your junior year, you'll take the MCAT if it's not already completed. This is also crunch time for the AMCAS application. This is the application used to apply to medical degree MD programs. This includes sending in transcripts, filling out the application itself, which means writing a personal statement, writing about your activities, and then you want to submit your AMCAS application by the end of May or beginning of June. Then there's something called the secondary applications. These are school specific. So each medical school will require additional essays for you to fill out. These are typically completed during the summer months of July through August. And then September through April is the interview season for medical schools. This is when medical schools will be inviting applicants to interview. May through June, admissions decisions are made. And in fact, admissions decisions are made throughout the year as interviews are given. And you would basically expect to start medical school August of the following year. So as far as the application, the MCAS application, there are a lot of different components. There are transcripts that need to be sent in, biographical information, letters of recommendations, your personal statement, your activities descriptions, and then finally the list of schools you'll be applying to. So putting it all together, becoming a doctor, there are many different steps. Of course, the number one thing is to prepare and plan. So going into college, having an idea that you've got to apply to medical school is very important. This sets the tone for the rest of your career, maintaining a high GPA, scoring a high MCAT score, and then of course, working on your extracurriculars, your other activities to put together a comprehensive, well-rounded application. Finally, you get to the interview stage, and then you have entered medical school on your path to becoming a doctor. And at Med School Coach, we can help with all the different steps of the process. We have personalized admissions advice, physician advisors who've been through the process, who have actually participated in admissions committees and have much direct experience in admissions. We have support from start to end, and then have a wonderful, wonderful track record as well. And we do take a team approach. We have different advisors, writing advisors, and tutors who can help you through each stage. Okay.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lajardi. That was very helpful. We have several questions about the MCAT, so
Sure.
I'll start with some of them first. So is the MCAT similar to the SAT and ACT except for medical schools?
I would say it's different. I mean, in some ways it's the same because the standardized test, it's timed, but it is different in that there are very specific subjects that are covered in the MCAT. So this includes the physical sciences, the biological sciences, as well as more humanities and writing approach. So the MCAT is nice in the sense that they're very particular about subject areas. Those subject areas that are tested on match the pre-medical requisites that you'll be taking in college.
And what are the subject areas for the MCAT?
So the subject areas include physical sciences, which would be general chemistry, physics, and then you have biological sciences, organic chemistry, biology, and then you have the so-called humanities or critical thinking, which is more your English or humanities-based classes that are going to prepare you, as well as course like psychology.
And how many chances do you get to take the MCAT?
So you really can take it as many times as you want. For the most part, we recommend not taking it any more than 2 to 3 times. Of course, you want to take it, you want to do best you can the first time, but you are free to take it multiple times. I believe that generally it's not recommended to take any more than 5 times.
And if you do poorly on the second time, do you still have a chance of getting into medical school?
Yes, of course. There are plenty of applicants who take the MCAT the third or fourth time and are successful.
And what resources would you suggest for studying for the MCATs?
Okay, so the resources I suggest number one courses to do as well as possible in your courses during your college career, as this really lays the foundation for the MCAT. Number 2, I do believe arbitrary courses or tutors such as the one that we have in Med School Coach are extremely valuable because you have basically content review as well as access to practice questions, and this can come through different companies as well as one-on-one tutors. What I love about Med School Coach is the one-on-one tutors. I think the personalized approach really helps, and then of course just practicing and stuff in general and devoting enough time, which usually is 2 to 3 months to apply, to prepare for the MCAT.
All right. I think that rounds out some of the MCAT questions, and we'll switch to the topic now.
Okay, sounds good. So after let's see if we can get more here for the SMD programs. We have one question: if you get into any medical school with a Bachelor of Arts degree as opposed to a Bachelor of Science degree, let's say.
Definitely. So I would say that that's still within the traditional route, and so you can definitely apply to any school with a Bachelor of Arts degree. And in fact, I know many people who went to medical school who were even who studied architecture and then did a postdoc or who did a Bachelor of Arts at some of the top schools. Both Dr. Lajardi and I are from our graduates in Northwestern, and as a bio major, I have a Bachelor of Arts degree and went on to particularly Northwestern medical school.
Okay, great. So our next question here is: when applying to college, it's hard to get into medical school if you don't go to a top tier school or a highly acclaimed school, or is it solely based on factors and size like the MCAT?
So you can definitely go to get into medical school without going to one of the Ivy Leagues or one of the top 20 schools. It's solely based on your extracurriculars, your MCAT scores, your research, and kind of your holistic package. The benefit of going to some of those top schools is just that those schools might have better resources for pre-med students. They might have better pre-med advising. If they're affiliated with medical school, they may have more opportunities for you to conduct research or to have earlier clinical exposure. Certainly, if you don't go to a school that has these opportunities, all you have to do is create these opportunities on your own. So just make a little bit more work, but you can definitely get in without being from a top tier school.
Okay, great. And another question that's important is: how does one apply to a BSMD program?
So a BSMD program is a direct medical entrance program, and you apply for it pretty much at the same time as when you apply to college. So as a high school student, most of your college applications will be due January 1st of your senior year in high school. For BSMD direct programs, most of your applications will be due just a few months earlier, anywhere from November to December. And the application process is very similar to what you would do to apply to college.
Okay, great.
All right. So Dr. Lajardi, we have a question about the value of doing EMT. Does getting EMT look good, even though I won't be able to have as much time to work as an EMT? I do plan on volunteering in the ER though.
It does. I think that if this is something that one is passionate about, becoming an EMT does display obviously an interest in medicine as well as some direct patient care. The thing is that you do get a certification or training to become an EMT, and you do want to actually engage in some activities where you use that. If that's not going to be possible, then perhaps volunteering in the emergency room could be a better route just to get some more clinical shadowing experience. But we have plenty of applicants who are successful who are EMTs, and you may not be working full time as an EMT, but you manage to do it on the weekends, let's say, or once a week, or even a couple shifts a month, and doing that throughout your college career can be highly valuable.
And how do medical missions trip look on applications? Is it considered part of extracurriculars?
It is part of extracurriculars. I would say that it is considered part of clinical activities and clinical experience if you're having contact with other physicians as well as patients. It's also part of volunteer activities. So if this is something one is interested in, it's definitely a good thing to pursue. I think that most medical mission type experiences are the ones that maybe occur year after year, or perhaps the students as they become so engaged that they become a leader in the organization.
Talking about some extracurriculars, we have some questions about research. What kind of, or can you give some examples of what research is and what kind of research would be good to do?
Absolutely. So generally there's 2 kinds of research. There's basic science or laboratory research, and this entails conducting experiments of working in a laboratory with animals, with cellular lines, more on the molecular level, and then there's clinical research, and this entails more interaction with patients or human beings as subjects. So either one is important. I think what's truly important about engaging in research is more of a long-term commitment. So trying to engage in research over a few years in your college career, at least 1 year, and then making sure that amounts to something like a publication, a poster presentation, or an abstract that's presented, so that there is something to show for the research that you conducted. Okay, so why don't we switch gears and I will ask you, Dr. Lee. So this is a very popular question. What majors do you recommend for pre-medical students?
So I always say that you should follow your passion, and any major is perfectly fine. So like I was saying before, I was a bio major and a religion minor, and I probably would have been a religion major if I had done college in 4 years instead of 3. The reason that so many people choose science majors is because to apply to medical school, you have to take certain pre-med classes, and by taking those pre-med classes, sometimes if you just take 2 or 3 more, or 3 or 4 more additional higher level classes, you can get a major out of that. If you want to suddenly do another major that's completely outside of what your pre-med classes require, a music major or a religion major or an English major, it just means that you have to find the time to fit in those classes within those 4 years, or consider taking an extra year. But any major is fine. Schools actually often like to see that you're a non-science major because they like the variety, and certainly learning English skills or literature skills is very helpful for medical schools, and so much of medicine is about communication. But follow your passion.
Okay, great. Let's actually ask a more BSMD focused question. But how would you recommend going about conducting research that would be beneficial to applying to a BSMD program?
So there's certainly a lot of summer research programs at most of the major universities that you can apply for. Some of these are Boston University has the RISE program, MIT has the RSI program, where you don't pay for it, they actually pay you. Texas Tech has the Clark's Scholar program, again, you don't pay for it, they actually pay you. But you can apply for some of these prestigious summer research programs where students are conducting research in the lab and have a high chance of getting a publication. Other ways that you can do research outside of major universities is that you can do research at some other summer programs or year-round programs such as the CDC, the NIH, or sometimes even the Air Force or NASA research programs that you can apply for.
Okay, great. And someone actually have one person wants to know if you are going to or pursuing a BSMD route, do you still take the MCAT?
So it depends on the program. So some programs will require you to take the MCAT and get a minimal score. Usually the minimum score is somewhere between 505 or 506, and we'll have Dr. Lajardi explain what that means. And some of them do not have MCAT requirements, so it really depends on the program. And Dr. Lajardi, one of our questions about the MCATs is what is considered a high score, and what should you be trying to get on your MCAT?
Okay. So you really try to aim for something that's above 510. So more towards 515, 514, 515, and anything above that is truly an exceptional score. So 520, 525 are outstanding scores, but within the range of 514, 514, 515, we're looking at being a competitive applicant. Really at the low end, at the very minimum, you want 510. Lower scores such as 505 to about 509 to make it quite more difficult to get into medical school. It's not impossible, but as I said, the low end would be 510. To make it competitive, we would be looking at 514, 515.
Okay. One of our other questions was, what kind of doctors are we? Dr. Vardy and I are both rheumatologists. So another question for you, Dr. Vardy, how important is your junior year for getting into medical school?
Your junior year of college is extremely important. I would say that as you advance in your college career, it becomes more and more important to admission committees. So this is because they expect you to know how to study. So they're more forgiving your freshman, maybe sophomore year, but your junior and senior year, you want to be taking a competitive course load and want to be taking basically your junior year as part of the medical school application.
And I think it seems like there's some confusion of what it means to be pre-med in college while also having a major. Could you explain what it means to actually be taking pre-med courses in college?
Yes. So taking pre-med courses doesn't mean that you're a pre-med major. Pre-med courses are just those requisites that we spoke about. So those are required courses that are needed to attend medical school. Those are the courses that medical schools are asking for. In addition to taking those pre-med requisites, you actually have to complete a major while you're in college to receive your college degree. And as Dr. Lee had mentioned previously, this major really could be in anything. It does not need to be science oriented. It can be a biology, a chemistry, a physics major, but it could be a religion major, a political science major. So they're actually separate, and you have to fulfill both components, not only to apply to medical school, but to really graduate with your college degree. Okay, let's ask about a more pandemic related question, Dr. Lee. So one of our participants is wondering, with the pandemic, is it harder to volunteer at the hospital or get firsthand experiences? And will colleges take this into account when you're applying to the BS MD programs?
Mm-hmm. So colleges definitely take this into account. One of the questions that they added into their application this past year was, how did COVID affect your education, and how did it affect your desire to be a doctor? So they definitely take into account lost opportunities. In terms of the current pandemic and the ability to continue doing extracurricular activities, certainly it's harder to volunteer or do in-person shadowing experience, but there are definitely virtual shadowing opportunities. Med School Coach has a virtual shadowing program that's free for anyone that signs up, shadowing.medschoolcoach.com. And in addition, there's certainly a lot of virtual volunteering opportunities that you can participate in, whether that's volunteering as a crisis hotline worker, whether that's volunteering as a phone hospice worker, or whether that's volunteering, say, to put together care packages that you deliver to the nursing homes without any contactless delivery. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities out there that you can still have direct patient care experience with.
Okay. And is there a particular way that you recommend finding a doctor to shadow?
Yeah, so as a high schooler, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult if you're younger than 16. Most hospitals will require you to at least be 16 to shadow. But typically, hospitals will have volunteer programs that you can apply to. And by volunteering at the hospital first, you will eventually be able to meet doctors or even be able to graduate into some of their shadowing programs. But again, you have to be 16 to participate in most of the programs.
And one of our participants is asking, if I've taken some of the prerequisite courses as AP classes in high school, does this involve the AP test? Will I be granted credit for them, or will I have to retake them in college since they're part of those prerequisites that are required by medical schools?
So typically, you'll be able to use some of those AP credits to test out over to get out of some of the introductory classes. So instead of starting in intro to chemistry, you might be able to start directly in organic chemistry. So those AP credits do count.
Okay, great.
All right, Dr. Lojardy. So I think some of the other questions we have are, let's see. So what can you do specifically to increase your chances of getting into a prestigious medical school?
So this is an excellent question, and it's very popular. I would say that can be really helpful in getting into a prestigious medical school. So this is given that you obviously have an impeccable GPA and extremely high MCAT. This is the foundation, and also having a unique component to your application. So maybe that means a theme. Perhaps that is, for example, someone who's interested in the elderly population, and they engage in, let's say, neuroscience research, that has to do with dementia, and then also volunteered at nursing homes or with the elderly community. And sort of having that overlying theme to show that you're really passionate about one particular area within medicine can be helpful, or doing something completely different. So when I say unique, this could be maybe starting your own business, perhaps creating your own organization within your school. Really being a leader and being a creator of something can really help to give you that edge to get into the prestigious medical schools.
Mm-hmm. How do you recommend finding a doctor to shadow?
So what you could do basically is really just call them directly. It's all about direct contact as much as possible. Just like Dr. Lee was talking, it's a little bit difficult now with the pandemic, but as the pandemic is more under control, hopefully there'll be more volunteers at basically offices, but number one really is to call them, to email them, to ask them directly, introduce yourself, let them know that you're a pre-medical student, you're really interested in becoming a doctor, and would there be an opportunity to shadow? So just direct contact that can be through phone and email. A lot of times the physicians and the practice managers are really busy and they don't have time necessarily to be looking at their email. So actually calling the office, I find, is the most direct route.
Mhm. And does the college I go to affect my chances of getting into medical school? Can I go to a Christian college?
Of course, you can go to any college you want. Number one importance is basically to make sure that you excel in your college. So that means your high GPA and you get a great MCAT. Of course, going to a prestigious undergraduate university does carry some weight as well. So trying to go to the most competitive college that you possibly could go to. But if that's not the case, then actually pursuing the most competitive courses and challenging coursework within your college and doing well becomes equally as important.
Is it true that medical students don't really choose their specialty, but they're kind of sorted out or weeded out based on their performance grades, class rankings during medical school?
I wouldn't say that's necessarily true. I would say that some different specialties are more competitive than others. But at the end of the day, the whole point of medical school is to expose students to all different specialties and to allow them to pursue what they want. Now, there are different steps within medical school, including board exams and so forth, that then open the door to different specialties. So it kind of really is a combination of your own interests as well as how you perform in medical school. All right, so let's see. Does the medical school you graduate from have a big influence on the job you can get afterwards, Dr. Lee?
So definitely not. So it's really the residency program that you go to that matters. So after medical school, you go to residency, and residency is where you get all of your specialty specific training. And depending on the quality of the residency program you go to, that will impact your chances of doing a fellowship, which is additional specialized training, versus going straight into getting a job.
Okay, great. And as a junior in high school, what can I do now involving research that would help prepare me for applying to a BSMD program?
So just getting involved in research is probably the best thing to do just to start. Beyond that, if you can submit abstracts or publications based on your research, that will definitely help you stand above the rest of the applicants.
Okay. And when you do get into medical school, when do you have to decide what specialty you want to pursue? For example, if I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an anesthesiologist or a psychiatrist, when would I have to decide?
Mhm. So you don't actually have to decide until you have to apply to residency, which is at the beginning of your fourth year of medical school. Most people will start to have an understanding of what their preference is sometime during their third year of medical school, because that's when you do your clinical rotations. So you'll rotate with psychiatry and you'll also rotate with anesthesiology. And by observing the field and getting hands-on experience, you'll usually get a feel internally about which specialty is the right fit for you.
Okay, great. So in essence, you don't need to know what specialty you want to pursue as soon as you get into medical school. This is something you figure out or can figure out while in medical school.
Mm.
Okay, great. So let's see. And I am just looking to see if we've got some BSMD specific questions that we can ask you, Dr. Lee. This isn't specific to this, but an interesting question. Are you less likely to be accepted into med school if you have a Bachelor of Arts instead of a Bachelor of Science?
Definitely not. So again, bachelors of arts versus bachelors of science is just semantics based on the undergrad school. Like I mentioned earlier, I graduated from Northwestern as a biology major, and as a biology major, I got a Bachelor of Arts. And that's just because of the way the school, that's just the way that Northwestern was set up.
Okay, great.
Does it matter when you're applying to medical school as a college student, or is it when you do in college that matters the most?
So it truly is what you do in college that matters the most, unless you have an experience in high school that carry on throughout college. So let's say you started in high school and it was something that you continue to pursue during college, then I would say that it's extremely important because it shows that longitudinal relationship, and commitment that you had. Otherwise, I would say that mostly admissions committees are looking for important activities and sustained participation within college.
Mhm. And what are ways to handle the cost of medical school above and beyond scholarships?
So, of course, you can finance your medical school education through financial aid. Every single medical school does offer this. This can be a combination of grants, which do not need to be paid back, as well as student loans. And those do have to be paid back over time. There are some great programs in place where, if, for example, you work in more of a public service type position after residency for a number of years, your loans are forgiven. But in addition to scholarships, you basically can and are eligible to apply to financial aid. And I would say the majority of medical students are doing this to finance their medical education.
Mhm. And also adding on to that, I think there's a trend nationally where medical schools are recognizing the financial burden, and a lot of not a lot, but some prestigious medical schools are going tuition free. NYU, Kaiser in California, and it's becoming a more common trend now that we know the cost of medical education is long lasting. So,
Exactly.
Dr. Larjavardi, how can we get started? How can we get started into medical research early?
So I would say basically pursuing research within different departments or science departments in at a university um, is a way that you could go about it. And in order to do this, it's really just being direct, just like the shadowing. So this means emailing, perhaps trying to meet with directors of labs so that, and I would do this early on, perhaps as soon as you enter college as a freshman, trying to contact different labs and see if there's positions available as a research assistant or as a volunteer, and starting as soon as possible. And I would keep the doors open to many different types of research or departments and really just sort of cast a wide net, see where there's openings, and then pursue it from there.
Mhm. Do you have any thoughts about becoming a CNA or a certified nursing assistant during high school or undergrad? Will this help my medical school application?
I think that it can help. Of course, becoming a CNA can be very time consuming, and then particularly working as one. However, they're still going to want to see, admissions committees are still going to want to see physicians shadowing. So just because you are a CNA and have some patient care doesn't mean you still understand what it means to be a physician. So make sure that it doesn't take the place of actual physician shadowing.
Mhm.
All right. So, Dr. Lee, can you tell us just a little bit about the boards? What are the medical boards?
So when we talk about the boards, we are typically referring to one of two things. The first is we might be referring to the USMLE Step 1, 2, and 3, which are tests that we take while in medical school, and they are the initial tests that we need to take to get certified as an MD. They test your basic knowledge with categories like biochemistry, biology, physics, things like that. The second thing that boards might refer to are your specialty boards. So Dr. Larjavardi and I are both dermatologists, which means that we've taken a boards test administered by the American Board of Dermatology to test our knowledge, in dermatology so that we can practice in our specialty field.
Great. And what classes should one take in high school to help get into a BSMD program?
So definitely I would recommend taking a good course load of STEM classes, but it's also important to be well-rounded and to also take English classes, foreign language, humanities classes. When we're talking about STEM classes, they can really vary based on what's offered at your school. So I would recommend trying to take the highest level of STEM classes possible. So the highest level of math. It's quite impossible to take the highest level of biochemistry and physics just because you don't have enough time to do it all. So definitely at least take the highest level in some of the sciences that you can fit, whatever you can fit into your high school career.
And Dr. Lee, are you able to give us some examples of schools that have a BSMD program?
So I'm a graduate of Northwestern's BSMD program. They have put their program on pause or on hold for this year. Brown has a BSMD program. New Jersey Medical School has a BSMD program. Boston University, Temple, Drexel, Case Western, several of the Texas schools like Texas Tech. There's a good number out there.
Okay, great. All right, so let's see. When applying to an Ivy League medical school, is the application treated any differently if you already go to an Ivy League in undergraduate?
So usually not. They usually just, again, look at your application holistically to see how well you've done with your grades, with your testing, with your community service, extracurriculars. They really do try to be as unbiased as possible in that respect.
Okay, wonderful.
So we have several questions about courses that we have to take in the pre-med track. Can you just briefly answer that, Dr. Larjavardi?
Sure. So courses would be, again, like general chemistry 1 and 2. So this means a whole year of general chemistry. Then we've got organic chemistry 1 and 2. So this is an entire year of organic chemistry. And this means with lab. So you actually have to take the lab portion of these courses. Physics would be 1 and 2 typically. Obviously, if you go to a school like Northwestern where there's quarter system, these classes span the entire academic year. Biology as well, just as general biology with laboratory. And then with mathematics, this is typically calculus 1 and 2 at the very least. Perhaps sometimes statistics course can also qualify for the mathematics portion of the pre-med courses. And then, of course, taking some humanities classes. So this is going to be English, political science, history, but classes that do require significant writing so that you can demonstrate your writing abilities as well.
And again, I think there's still some confusion about the pre-med designation.
Yes.
So is there such a thing as a pre-med undergraduate degree, or do I need to have a science major?
You need to have any sort of major really to graduate with your college degree. So there is not as far as I understand, there's no pre-med major. The pre-med, being a pre-med really just means that you have intentions of applying to medical school and that you are taking those prerequisite courses that are required by medical schools to enter their school. But you must always demonstrate or declare a major in order to get either your Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science degree from your undergraduate institution.
What are the differences between different types of residencies, and what is residency?
So residency is your training in your specific specialty. So in residency, you have already become a medical doctor in the sense that you have graduated with your medical degree, but you don't have your training yet. And so residency is specific to the specialty that you choose. Every specialty has their own residency, which varies in the number of years that are required to complete the residency. And in residency, you learn about your specialty. So for example, in dermatology, during your dermatology residency, you are fully immersed in dermatology and learn all about dermatology so that you can become a dermatologist. And this would be the same for, let's say, an anesthesiology residency, a pediatric residency, a general surgery residency. This is really your training and how you gain knowledge of your very specific and particular specialty.
Mm-hmm. And how many hours do med schools like to see for shadowing doctors?
Okay, so this is an excellent question. And I would say probably about somewhere in maybe 80 to 100 hours. Now that sounds like a lot, but at a minimum, perhaps 50 hours. It's a good rule of thumb is to have 200 hours of extracurriculars. So this can be divided among the different categories we spoke about. So this would be your research, your leadership, your clinical work. Shadowing would be part of it. So 200 hours total, and somewhere, let's say, in the range of 50 to 100 for physician shadowing. Closer to 100 is even more ideal if possible.
Mm-hmm. And what are interviews like for med school? Are they one-on-one or are they more group interviews?
So it can vary. They can be one-on-one. Oftentimes they are one-on-one with either the dean of admissions or a faculty member. And then there's a one-on-one interview with a medical student. Sometimes it can be 2 or 3-on-1 with there's several faculty members or maybe a couple of medical students with the one interviewee. On occasion, there are group interviews where there are a few applicants together who are interviewing with one faculty member. But I would say historically, it's one-on-one.
Okay.
All right. So, Dr. Lee, what would you suggest a high school student do to familiarize themselves with the healthcare field and get early experience?
Mhm. So I think volunteering in the healthcare field and shadowing is the most important. Again, local hospitals will have volunteer departments, and so I would say that the high school student should contact their local hospital assuming they're at least 16 or older, to see if they can start volunteering. And usually, with those volunteering opportunities, you're usually working in the ER or you're passing out blankets or other small things in between patient floors. So that's a good way for you to see a lot of the hospital and a lot of different things that you can do within the hospital and what medicine is.
Okay. And is it true that BSMD programs are more stressful than taking just regular pre-med courses or following, let's say, a regular college career?
Mhm. So you're taking the exact same courses as the regular pre-med students are. I would argue that it's actually less stressful because you already have that guaranteed seat in a medical school, whereas the other students are kind of stressing out about having to prepare the best application possible. But you're taking the exact same classes as a pre-med student would be.
Okay, great. And what is the best way to become a pediatrician?
So I love pediatrics. So with becoming a pediatrician, pediatrics is a residency, just like being an OB-GYN is or being a dermatologist is. So after you graduate from medical school, any medical school, you just have to match into a pediatrics residency and then pass your pediatrics boards, and then you'll be a pediatrician.
Great. And do you get paid in residency?
Fortunately, you do, not very much, but you do get paid. And so that definitely helps to, support your living costs.
Great. And another question actually is, do medical schools check your high school grades when they're looking at your application?
So typically not. So medical schools, when you're applying in college, medical schools only look at your college performance.
Okay, great.
All right. Um, so if you wanted to specialize in pediatric oncology, how would that work? Do you have to do two separate residencies in peds and onc?
No, actually, what you would do is you would first pursue your residency in pediatrics so that you would become a general pediatrician. And then from there, you actually pursue training to become a subspecialist. And this is what the fellowship is. So you would then pursue an additional fellowship in pediatric oncology. And after that fellowship, you would become a pediatric oncologist. So you don't need two different residencies. You would do a residency in general peds, and then you specialize by pursuing a fellowship within your field.
Okay. And what is the scale of the MCAT? What's the highest score you can get?
So I believe the highest score is about a 530 that you can get. Obviously, it's very, very hard to get this, but the closer you get it, the more outstanding it is. As I said before, really anything above a 515 or once you're into the 520s is extremely competitive.
Mhm. Do you recommend going to medical school through an ROTC program or any military scholarships or military programs?
So I think that they're excellent. The wonderful thing about going through a military scholarship is that your medical education is financed. And if you're passionate about the military, then there's great opportunities to be able to practice in military bases as well. So I do think that can be a fantastic option.
Mhm. Um, so I sometimes have doubts about becoming a physician. How do I know that medicine is the right thing for me?
Okay, that's a great question. That's why these experiences in clinical work and shadowing are so important, just to get a sense of what it truly is to be a doctor day in and day out. I think that if part of you, any part of you feels like becoming a physician is the way for you, then that means that you should become a doctor. But the way to further explore this is honestly to engage in opportunities where you can see what a doctor does day to day, and gain a better understanding. So if you're on the fence about it, trying to pursue more opportunities within basically the clinical realm and shadowing can be really, really helpful.
Okay.
All right, let's see. If I want my own practice, when should I take business classes?
Mhm. So there's no great time to take business classes. A lot of people that open their own practice just learn about the business of medicine during residency or fellowship. Some of my classmates also did an MD, MBA at the same time, which are some programs available at different medical schools.
This is a good question. How do sports play into extracurriculars?
Yeah, so sports are looked upon very highly in the sense that they can provide a lot of leadership positions, and they also you also have to have a high level of dedication and time wise devoted to sports to do well. So I would definitely encourage you to continue to do your sports if that's something that you're passionate about. That does not take the place of doing research or community service or clinical shadowing or volunteering, though.
Okay. And we touched on this a little bit, but can you shadow as a high school student?
Definitely. So again, a lot of local hospitals will have already established programs, as long as you're 16 or older, for you to shadow, to work in the hospital and also shadow as a high school student. You can also contact doctors that you might know, like your own pediatrician or your parents' internist or family friends or parents of friends you go to school with. All of those are possible opportunities for shadowing.
Okay, wonderful. And I think that we've rounded out a good variety of questions. And let me just see if there's any further ones that we can touch on. How many colleges should I typically apply to for the BSMD programs?
Mhm. So I typically recommend at least 12 to 15, and I certainly have applicants that apply to, closer to 20. With the Common App, which is what you use to apply to college, you're limited to applying to 20 schools. There are slight ways around this, but typically people apply to at least 15 or so.
Great, wonderful.
Well, thank you, Dr. Larjavardi. I think I wanted to thank all of our audience members for the lively discussion, and we look forward to hearing from you guys soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
All right. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Larjavardi.
you, everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.